You are listening to the Air Raid Hour with host Judge Mathis, dog, Tilt Money, dog, presented by the fine folks over at the Cover One Sports Network, dogs. Bills Mafia, let's go!
You could tell it's not Judge hosting because I've messed it up already. But good evening, everyone. Welcome into the Air Raid Hour. I am your host for tonight, Tilt Money. I am joined by a very special co-host tonight. You know him affectionately on social media as Hansel and at Uber Hansen. So Hansel, welcome in tonight to the Air Raid Hour. We are presented by Picasso's Pizza and, of course, proud members of the Cover One Sports Network. So, Hansel, how are we feeling tonight? Tomorrow's cut down day. Some news to cover tonight. A little bit of a potpourri show, but how are we feeling tonight?
Yeah, I mean, what are we, 11 days till the first game or something like that? Like now it's here. Like there's no other football until the Bills play, but obviously 53-man cut downs like kind of stinks a little bit because you have to see some players that fans have grown to love get cut from this team. But at the same time, at least we get to see the 53-man roster that's going to hopefully lead us to a Super Bowl.
Exactly. And as we are getting closer to the season, I know I am going through a number of fantasy football drafts right now. And as part of that, I am having to figure out what I'm going to be doing for food for those drafts. So I am actually going to be ordering some Picasso's Pizza from picassospizza.net. Whenever you guys are in the chat and you're not local to Buffalo, you can order this pizza online, picassospizza.net. They do have 4 great locations in the Buffalo area: Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo pizza since 1980. You get that hand-cut cup and char pepperoni that we all know and love, and I'll be ordering some pizzas for my fantasy drafts coming up this weekend. So on that note, let's get right into the first topic of the night. And it seems like, and one of my friends texted me this earlier today, that good punters are just seemingly falling out of the sky right now. And the Bills look like they might have some options. So let's take a quick run through some of the options that are out there now. Brett Kern was released by the Tennessee Titans, a Western New York native. He's one of the best punters in football. Sam Martin, released by Denver after refusing to take a pay cut. Will the Bills be willing to pay up if he wants some big money? We will see. The potential loser of the Kevin Huber, Drew Chrisman battle in Cincinnati is something to keep an eye on. The Bills have worked out Michael Pilardi, and as we know, there's familiarity there from his time in Carolina, punted there for 4 or 5 seasons. They've worked out Tyler Newsome, Joseph Charlton. They did reach out to Marquette King, who hasn't punted in the league for a few years, to see if he was in football shape. And so there are a lot of punters available, a lot of good punters available. So we're doing our 53-man roster predictions tonight. So I guess the first question I'll ask you, Hansel, and I'm going to ask the comments section this as well, is should the Bills wait to sign a punter? Should the Bills construct their 53-man roster without a punter, wait till Tuesday, wait till Wednesday, or should they be going in after one of these guys that we just mentioned and who just to shore up that position ahead of kind of finalizing the 53-man roster? Where do you come out on this? Because I've seen a lot of different opinions on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a pure roster construction standpoint, it makes sense to wait. Like I started kind of scanning through the teams. There's not really many teams looking for a punter. So I don't really think the Bills are going to be competing against anyone other than themselves to sign a lot of these guys. And at the same time, they can kind of finagle their roster a little easier. Like they don't have to do as many of the, hey, you wait in the parking lot, we'll re-sign you to bring you back. They won't have to do that because they essentially have a free spot now. And I don't think it's really going to change too much if they sign him. Like, let's say they sign Brett Kern. What's the difference if they sign Brett Kern today or they sign him after 4 p.m. tomorrow? There really is no difference other than it gives the Bills a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah. And here's the thing, right? Guys like Brett Kern are getting cut. What does that tell you, right? Well, it tells you that there is an excess of punters out there in my mind when I see guys like that getting cut in favor of the rookie Stonehouse, obviously in Tennessee, Sam Martin getting cut in Denver, who's a very good punter in his own right. I mean, there are punters out there, right? The Bills found Matt Hawk, and there was question of like when they signed him, there were other guys out there as well available. I don't honestly know like that there is a big benefit to sign a guy immediately, like you said. I think there, from a flexibility standpoint, you can roster 53 guys, activate 53 guys, and then if you want to, if there's some guy that's banged up or something like that, you could probably go ahead and move a guy to the IR, short-term IR. They can come back after 4 weeks, I believe. And so it gives the Bills some flexibility from that standpoint as well, because, you know, there is a risk of the Bills losing guys to other teams as they try to put them through waivers as they go through their cutdowns. And we're going to get to that in a little bit more detail later. But I mean, obviously, like Brett Kern seems to be the favorite amongst fans right now. I'm seeing a lot of people in the comments section on that as well. See Fitz says Kern, bring him home. Spin in reference to Marquette King saying, "What kind of football shape do you need to be a punter?" Who's the guy what's the guy's name that punts for the Niners? He's got like the long hair. That guy's jacked. I mean, that dude.
Oh,
Townsend or not Townsend. It's like I can't remember his name. Townsend's I think the Packers. I don't remember, but anyway, that guy's jacked.
I was gonna say I listen to Pat McAfee's show nearly every day. I think he's incredible. And McAfee, obviously being an all-pro punter at one point in his career, has detailed like how different it is to punt when you're in shape and out of shape. He said like when he first got in the league, he was like ripping beers and cigs left and right, having the time of his life. And he's like, as I got older, I realized I couldn't do that anymore. You start to lose the flexibility in your leg. You start to kind of lose the power, lose the consistency. So he said like, people always kind of hit him up. They're like, come back to the league. You're still young. You can do it. And he's like, nah, I weigh 250 pounds. I can't come back and punt in the NFL at this point in time.
You like when you watch these punters, right, in slow motion, and not to get too sidetracked here, when you watch these punters in slow motion, the extension they get and the flexibility they get with that kicking leg, and really how far they get off the ground, some of these guys when they punt, you don't really think about it because as soon as they kick, that camera pans down right to the returner, and you don't really see. But like these guys are getting off the ground, they're like doing splits in the air. Like it's pretty wild, actually, the flexibility some of these guys have, and I mean, it's impressive. I mean, from my standpoint, I'm glad that like the topic of conversation has shifted now, and like the Bills are putting this whole situation behind them. So honestly, this is an interesting comment from here we go. It's from just had it here. Why can't I find it? Someone mentioned that the biggest loser in this whole thing is Tyler Bass from a holder's perspective. So we know Matt Hawk was brought in last year because obviously he could punt, but he was a very good holder as well. So knowing the history and knowing the Bills' propensity to ensure that they have a good holder, how much do you think that's going to factor in this next decision? Because these punters that are being mentioned, there's really been no, from what I can tell, there's really no knock on any of them as being bad holders from what I can tell.
Yeah. And actually, I didn't really think of this until literally just now, but like the Titans have had a major kicking issue like the past 5 years. I don't remember the exact game. I think it might have been in 2017, or maybe it was Josh's rookie year. They essentially lost to the Bills because their kicker missed like 5 field goals.
Yeah.
And if when I say that, I don't know if it's more the kicker's fault or is Brett Kern not a good holder. I literally don't know, so I don't want to really comment either way. But now I'm starting to think like maybe Kern's not the best holder in the world. But at the same time, these guys have been in the league. Like Kern's been in the league for what, 14 years or something?
Yeah, he's
obviously
been in the league for a long time.
He's obviously good enough at what he does. And if the Bills are showing interest in him, that's going to be a primary thing. I know that Marquette King, somebody had tweeted at him like, but how are you at holding? And he very quickly posted a video of him like catching and twisting the ball on the ground. So it seems that these guys all kind of know, like if they come to Buffalo, their primary job is holding. I think the bigger thing when we talk about these punters that I'm starting to look at and think about is who's done it in bad weather. Like who's the
Right.
guy that's played in an absolute wind tunnel of a stadium? And you look at someone like Sam Martin, for instance, and he's played in Denver the past 2 seasons. But before that, if I have it right, Sam Martin, yeah, he was in Detroit, so in a dome
Yep.
for most of his career.
Yep.
So I start thinking about these, and then I'm looking at Kevin Huber, who I'm guessing they're going to give Drew Crispin that job just because he's the younger guy. So Huber plays in Cincinnati, which is, I don't think they have great weather. I don't think they have horrible weather, but maybe he fits the weather more of Buffalo than Kern or Martin. But I haven't really heard Huber connected to the Bills outside of us like speculating. Maybe he'd come there just because he's a vet that's likely to be cut.
Yeah, and like I mean, I think these things catch fire when the guy actually gets cut, right? Like we knew Brett Kern was in that battle with Stonehouse, but the match really lit the fire once he was cut, right? And then it was like, okay, let's see about Brett Kern. So I think you could see that with Huber as well. Cincinnati, obviously not the easiest place to kick. We know that, so that could be a decent option. I mean, Tennessee's had, it's not the worst weather, but it's not the best, I would say. I mean, obviously Sam Martin in Denver has had some games where he's had to hold in some, snowy conditions and some wind, but an interesting seeing his stats and how they might have fluctuated punting in Mile High. But in any case, it is going to be very interesting. We'll find out. I think the biggest kind of cool thing to watch out for is if the Bills sign a punter before cutdowns or afterwards. So that is going to be the thing to look for. So speaking of cutdowns, the Bills did make some moves today. Their first slew of cuts came in. Jacob Capra, Tanner Owen, Neil Pau, Daniel Joseph, Jordan Miller, and Josh Thomas were cut in the first round of cuts. Anything here shock you or anything here a bit of a surprise?
No, I think these were all pretty, like I didn't have any of these guys touched in the 53. I have a couple of them that I think could try to find their way to the practice squad or the Bills could want them there. The one thing I'll say is, the Bills release these depth charts all preseason and people make a big deal about them. Every time I see a depth chart the Bills post in preseason, I look at it and just I'm like, this is meaningless to me. Absolutely meaningless. The Bills had Tanner Owen as their backup guard. On their latest depth chart. So when I see that, I'm like, Tanner Owen's not the backup guard, but that could say something like, yeah, Owen's going to get brought back for the practice squad because they do think highly of him. So not surprised in this initial, 6 or 7. But yeah.
I think that Tanner Owen's a guy I could see coming back to the practice squad. Bills lost Jack Anderson, obviously, and trying to put him through waivers last year. On the flip side, the Bills were able to get a guy like Ryan Bates over to their squad, an undrafted guy, or maybe a late draft pick from the Eagles who we liked during the pre-draft process. So these late round sort of interior offensive linemen, the Bills have an affinity for putting those guys on the practice squad. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Tanner Owen, a young guy who played okay in practice and in training camp, make his way to the practice squad. I mean, you always knew from a receiver standpoint that, guys like Gentry and Pau were going to be likely cut, and not surprising that Pau was the first receiver cut. He was last on the depth chart of all the receivers. So that's an interesting name to keep an eye on to see if maybe he comes back to the practice squad. In my sort of preliminary practice squad projection, I do have him coming back to the practice squad just because, the Bills, as much as we love their receiving core, like we don't know what the future is going to hold for Marquez Stevenson. He's hurt. And outside of maybe getting Isaiah Hodgins on the practice squad, and we'll see if he makes it to the 53 or not. You don't have a ton of guys. It's Tanner Gentry and Neil Pau. So if they want to put a receiver on the practice squad, I could see that being the case. I mean, otherwise, like I kind of like what I saw from Jordan Miller. But I also know the Bills are kind of flush with depth in the secondary right now. And like, not to say that they're amazing, but like guys like Nick McLeod, guys like Josh Thomas, who is another one of these cuts. Like, I could see these guys coming back to the practice squad. So a guy like Jordan Miller, I think, might be tough for him to make it back. I mean, do any of these guys outside of Tanner Owen sort of wet your whistle for a practice squad invite?
Yeah. So Josh Thomas was my off-season crush last year. Like literally going into the cut down day, I was like, I don't know how they keep Josh Thomas off the 53. He had such a great preseason. He looked like a stud in preseason, and it wasn't that he was going to supplant a Micah Hyde or a Jordan Poyer or a Jaquan Johnson or even really DeMar Hamlin, who was a rookie last year, I believe, maybe his second season. But nonetheless, I thought Josh Thomas at a minimum could play some special teams for the Bills, and they brought him back on the practice squad last year. And I think that they like the familiarity there, and they've seen the talent level with him. Like they know they can put him on the practice squad. And I think a lot of things that people forget is there's two parts to the practice squad, right? One is you have like essentially a reserve where in case
Yep.
of an injury, you can bring a guy up and say, here, we have this guy that we can plug and play for a week or two. The other part is these guys are literally practicing against the first team, the top 53, and those reps matter. It makes them better if the practice squad is better. So with someone like Josh Thomas, you know what he can do. You've seen him play against this team for a couple of years now. I think there's a benefit to bring him back. And I also like Pau. Like Pau's not going to get claimed. I would be absolutely stunned if he gets claimed. So why not bring him back? He's a big body. He seems fairly raw. Maybe you can build something there, and he could be a wide receiver 5 or 6 in a couple of years. Maybe he could even get better at special teams and be the next Jake Kumaro. I guess we're gonna have to see with Pau.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he is raw, played at Brigham Young, but he was, against his competition, he fared well, right? I mean, he was definitely one of the more noticeable players on the field when you watched Brigham Young games and the way that he handled himself. So it'll be
And
interesting to see what
he's
happens with him.
old. He's old
Yeah.
too. I think he's 27 or something.
Yeah, he's up there. Your boy Lettuce comes in with the super chat. Thank you, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like this is going to be the case. It looks like Stonehouse won that job for the Titans, as we were just talking about them releasing Brett Kern. So it looks like Stonehouse is going to be the punter for the Titans. And look, when you make an investment in a draft pick, you'd like to see that draft pick kind of be the one to take the job. So no real shock there, I guess. Titans going with the rookie. Okay. Any other final thoughts on these initial cuts? Because otherwise, we're going to move on to one of the hotter topics of the day from social media.
Nah, I think the cuts were pretty straightforward. Like we knew these guys were going to get cut. So
Yeah. Okay. So next segment, the NFL Top 100 list, and the top, the remainder of the list was released last night. We saw 20 through 1 get released last night. We knew who the 20 were going to be going in. We just didn't know the order. And as it turns out, our franchise, Josh Allen, gets ranked number 13 in the NFL Top 100 list after being ranked 10th a year ago, keep in mind. And now I know there's some nuance to this, right? Voting happens in November, similar timing as the Pro Bowl ballots. Only about a third of the players are voting on it. So I have some issues with that anyway. But Josh Allen coming in at number 13 on the NFL Top 100 list. Obviously, I think a surprise to most. We kind of all figured he'd at least be in the top 10 or match his ranking from last year, if not better it. And there's other issues with some of these guys in the top 15, top 10 in my mind as well. But the first thing I will say is the voting's done in November during the season seems odd to me, right? You have this list coming out in the late summer, the end of the preseason. I know that, the first batch of guys it's been a couple weeks process, but regardless, right? August is when this list comes out, but you're voting on it in November of the prior year. That seems odd to me. And I know they're trying to make it easier on the players to kind of pick, but like there's other ways you can do that, right? Like you don't have to have every player fill out 100 names. Like have every player fill out, I don't know, like 25 names and then like weight it, right? Based on voting or
So
something like that.
so it's top 20. They only vote top 20.
So
They
there
only
you
pick
go. It's
20
already,
people. Yeah, it's already easy. Like it's easy for them. And to your point, why are they doing it in the like? They all you do is mail a bet. Not even why is it written too?
I
That's the thing
don't
that kind
know.
of blows
I don't
blows my.
know.
You can literally the NFL could design an app in 5 seconds that they just send like a code to each player, and they're like, all right, pick your top 20 players and just send it to us, and it automates and does everything itself. But instead, they're doing written ballots. It makes literally no sense at all.
No, I know. It doesn't. Jason says, "Oh boy, another list that people get worked up over." I mean, it's true. Look, we're at the end of the preseason. Like,
Mm,
we want to back our guy, right? Like, this is a very there are a lot of lists, right? But this is a very public list. It is very um, sort of widely discussed. It's voted on by peers, right? It's your own players, and so there's a whole conversation on whether or not that makes sense. But look, I think the reality of it is we feel that, and a lot of people feel like Josh Allen's one of the 5 best players in the NFL, if not one of the 10 best, if you want to get really pedantic with it. And to see
mhm,
him come in, under other guys. I mean, I'll read the list for those who don't know of the guys who are ahead of him, right? So you have Josh Allen's number 13. You have Derrick Henry 12, Myles Garrett 11, Travis Kelce 10, Jalen Ramsey 9, Pat Mahomes 8, Devontae Adams 7, TJ Watt 6, Jonathan Taylor 5, Cooper Kupp 4, Aaron Rodgers 3, Aaron Donald 2, and Tom Brady 1. So look, all of those guys are great players. Don't get me wrong, but I could make a case to put him above, at least 5 or 6 of those guys. Like I'm making a case to put Josh Allen above a guy like Jalen Ramsey who plays corner. And I know corner
mhm.
it's a tough position to play, and Jalen Ramsey's fantastic. But how do you put a guy that plays like a specialized defensive position over a quarterback like Josh? And it goes on and on. So what was your initial reaction, I guess? Do you put too much I guess my first question to you would be is do you care about these lists? Do you read much into them? Do you get worked up over them? Do you not care? I mean, you're all over Twitter. Like
Yeah.
you're one of the most active people I know on Twitter. And so I know you're interacting with people on this topic. So where do you come out on these types of things?
Yeah, these lists, more so just player voting on things. I don't get worked up about it. And if anything, it validates the concept to me that you don't always trust, like players, just because you play football doesn't mean you know more about football than a lot of people, or you know more about all the players in football. Like, is Josh Allen the 13th best player in the NFL? Absolutely not. He's way higher than that. I could actually make a case for all 12 in front of him, but I do think Allen's probably top 5 and has proved he's top 5. The thing to me with these like player voting things, I go back. We were talking about this occurs at the same time as the Pro Bowl. Lamar Jackson made the Pro Bowl last year, and Lamar Jackson's statistics last year were horrendous. Like they were not
Yep.
good. He was
Yep.
he was bad. Like frankly bad. Allen wasn't bad. I know everyone's like, oh, he had a slow start to the year. He was struggling. So just real quick, I pulled up the numbers through the first 12 games. So this was right around Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
Josh Allen was averaging the same number of yards that Pat Mahomes was averaging a game. Josh Allen had 29 touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes had 17. Josh Allen had 13 turnovers. Patrick Mahomes had 15. So if people are going off, they're like, oh, Josh was struggling the first half of the year. Well, he was doing better than a guy that you ranked 8th. And he actually wasn't significantly worse than, say, Tom Brady, who had 6 more touchdowns than him. But other than that, the stats were very similar. So it just comes down to a point where like the players voting, yeah, I don't really know what they were seeing that I guess we're not seeing. And the other thing to it too is I don't trust the NFL for a second here. The NFL tallied up all these votes. Let's say there was a 5-way tie for 9 through 13, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 5-way tie through 9 through 13. 1 billion% the NFL would be like, put him at 13. Like 13
For the
seconds,
13
you'll
seconds.
piss
Yeah.
off Bills fans. Like put him at 13. So I do think there's a little bit of that. Like maybe that's conspiracy theory, but
Hey, that's your best Judge Mathis impression right there with that conspiracy theory.
yeah. So yeah, I guess in summary, these things are silly, and to just further how silly they are, they rank the players 1 through 20, your top 20 players. Mac Jones made this list. That means that somebody, some NFL player, wrote down on a piece of paper, "Hey, Mac Jones is a top 20 player to me," which is absurd. That's absolutely ludicrous, and it just kind of proves that this whole list is just complete nonsense.
With the players only listing, or with them only listing 20 names, you know, it really shows that like how not consensus this thing is, because like,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm pretty sure in our cover one group chat, we have what, like 25, 30 people at cover one, something like that, right? 20 to 30 people.
Mhm.
If just the cover one guys did a top 20 players in the NFL list, I bet you wouldn't get more variance than maybe like 40 names total on that
Y-
list. 40 to
Yeah,
50 maybe. I don't even think you get 100 different names if we did it.
no, it might even be honestly might even be less than 40.
Might even be less. Yeah.
I think the top 10 to 15 are pretty chalky, and then maybe 16 through 20 people throw out a name or two that's a little out there, but yeah, I don't think you're going to see much variance.
Yeah, and as Steve Lynn points out, Mac Jones was ahead of Von Miller. I do think that has something to do with Von's age, obviously, but he still was quite good last year. So, obviously, the other names I think that were on the list, Von was like 92 or 93, Hyde was 50, Poyer was 45, and I think Diggs was 26, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And so the Bills had 5 guys on the list this year. All right. Moving on to our main topic of the day, our 53-man roster predictions. So we're going to go position by position. Some are going to be a lot easier than others. And honestly, I think we're probably going to be it's going to be pretty easy to do this for like the first 47, 48 guys on the team. The questions and a lot of the predictions where it's going to become kind of interesting is like, do you keep 7 wide receivers? Do you keep a 10th offensive lineman? Do you keep, a 10th defensive lineman, maybe 6th linebacker? So those are the things we're going to find out as we start to roll through these positions. Put in the comment section what you think as well. I know Chris Janke and others released their 53-man predictions on Twitter today, so it's very interesting reading some of those. A lot of predictions coming out today, so it's really cool to see. A lot of smart Bills fans out there, a lot of thoughtful opinions on this. So let's kick it off, right? Let's kick it off with quarterback. This seems fairly cut and dry
Yep.
to me. My prediction is 2 quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Case Keenum, with Matt Barkley going to the practice squad. I don't know if anyone has a different opinion than that, but that's how I see it happening.
Yeah, I think some people tried to have a different opinion after the preseason game one, which I thought was kind of silly, but to each their own. It's Josh Allen, Case Keenum, Barkley to practice squad. That's about as locked as it could be, I think.
That's about as long. Yeah, I agree. That one. And now going to running back is where I think you might start to see a little bit of differing opinion.
Mhm.
So for me, I struggled with this a little bit. I do have the Bills keeping 4 running backs. I have them keeping Singletary, Cook, Moss, and I do have them keeping Taiwan Jones as a special teamer. Very similar to what they did last year. It was Singletary, Moss, Breida, and Jones. So I'm just basically replacing Breida with James Cook this year for running backs. A lot of people showing love to Raheem Blackshear, and rightfully so. I'm a big Raheem Blackshear fan myself. And Duke Johnson, honestly, has acquitted himself pretty well this preseason. So the Bills are in a good position right now with running back. I think if you were going to, in your heart, want to put the best football players on the team from a offensive production standpoint, Taiwan Jones wouldn't be on the team, but we know special
Mhm.
teams are super important to McDermott. So that's why I have Taiwan Jones on the squad. That's my 4, and that's coming from what I think the Bills will do, not necessarily what I want them to do. So where do you come out on running back, Hansel?
Yeah, So I'm very outspoken that special teams matters. I try to scream it from the rooftop every chance I can get. So that I have Taiwan Jones. I've had him just about as a lock basically all offseason. He was a captain last year. There's a reason for that. There's a reason they brought him back. I see basically no way at cut down tomorrow that they move on from Taiwan Jones. I know that people like Blackshear. He looked really good in preseason. I like him too. I hope he can come back on practice squad. But I have Singletary, Cook, Taiwan Jones, and Zach Moss as your running backs. And I'll say like Taiwan Jones, he's not essentially not a running back. Like we should have a separate position on depth charts,
Yes.
like moving forward, where it's a
Yes.
special teams, and that's where
Yes.
Taiwan Jones goes. He's not a running back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. So far, so far we're in agreement through two positions. So maybe this next one is where we start to see a bit of variance. So wide receiver is next, and it's the age old debate. I think 6 or 7, right? I have the Bills keeping 6, which is the same as what they did last year. I have it as Diggs, Davis, Shakir, Kumaro, McKenzie, and Crowder, with Hodgins going to the practice squad. Hodgins was the guy that I was trying to find every way to try to put him on the team. But the reason I didn't is because I ended up keeping an extra offensive lineman in place of Hodgins. So I actually have 6 wide receivers. My heart of hearts, I want to put Hodgins on the team. My prediction is that the Bills don't put him on the team. So if it turns out that Hodgins does make the team, I will be happy about it. I'm definitely rooting for him, but my brain is telling me that the Bills are only going to keep 6 wide receivers. So that's where I struggled a bit with this one. So what do you think about this wide receiver group?
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with you yet again. I have the same exact 6. I have Hodgins going to practice squad, and when I say that, I do think he gets claimed. I don't think as many people are going to get claimed as Bills fans think, but I do think Hodgins is one of those guys that will get picked up, likely by the Giants, but that'll be something to kind of monitor. The one thing is, and again, going back to special teams, right? People are like, Kumaro doesn't need to play. Hodgins is a better receiver. Hodgins is 100% a better receiver than Kumaro, even in the short action we've seen Hodgins play. But over the past 2 seasons, the 6th wide receiver on the Bills has only been targeted a total of 12 times. Like that position it's not wide receiver 6 is not a wide receiver. It's that special teams spot in the depth chart we talk about again.
Mm-hmm.
And Hodgins hasn't looked all that great on special teams. Maybe he could improve. The one dark horse kind of move here that I think you could see, and I don't expect this, is the Bills say, Jamison Crowder, thank you for your time. We're moving on from you. We're going to bring in Hodgins. And the only reason I say that is it might provide some more versatility, right? McKenzie and Shakir could, in theory, shore up that slot spot. And then you have Hodgins as your backup outside guy. I still like Crowder over Hodgins, but I could see that happen, like 3% chance that happens.
Yeah, Steve and I talked about that on our last show. That was an interesting kind of debate to have, Crowder versus Hodgins, but I do think it's a low chance. And Spin, makes the point that you just made, right? For wide receiver 6, special teams holds a higher value than receiving skills. We saw it for years with guys like Sam Aiken, Marcus Easley, special teams guys at the bottom of the Bills receiver depth chart. And you're exactly right. Like that wide receiver 6 is a special teams player, whether it's a 4-phaser, in the coverage units, whatever, or whether it's a return man, like we saw with Andre Roberts a couple years ago, where he didn't really play wide receiver, but he was our punt and kick returner. Like that's great utilization of the wide receiver 6 as well if you have it. And I agree. Like if you're expecting significant offensive contributions from your wide receiver 6, that means that you've had some injuries, right? You've had multiple injuries to guys ahead. So I'm with you there. But again, if Hodgins does make it, let's say as a 7th wide receiver, and someone else gets cut, elsewhere on the roster, I'm not going to be up in arms about it. I'll be fine with it. So interesting. We're in agreement there. So far we've got 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 3/1 special teamer, and 6 receivers. So we are at 12 players so far. So we'll go to tight end now. And I kind of mixed Reggie Gilliam in with the tight ends. So I have the Bills actually keeping, right now, I have them keeping 3 true tight ends plus Reggie Gilliam. So if you want to call it 4, I'm not considering it 4. I'm kind of considering Reggie Gilliam a fullback / tight end. And it kind of hurts because I stuck to my guns before the news came out today about Quentin Morris's injury. And I had Dawson Knox, OJ Howard, and Quentin Morris as my TE3 and Reggie Gilliam as the fullback. But now I'm wondering, with Quentin Morris's injury, is there a chance that maybe the Bills kind of decide to put him on IR, protect him, know that they're going to have control over him? A guy like Tommy Sweeney might make the team. So I'll say Quentin Morris for now, hoping his injury is not serious. I know we don't really know the full extent of it right now, but that was my prediction from earlier in the day, so I'll stick with it. And I guess I'll ask you the question, Hansel. If Quentin Morris, let's say, was on track to make this team and he faced that injury today, should that change the Bills' plans with the roster overall, or do you think that means that Tommy Sweeney just slides in? Or do you think that means, well, maybe they would actually consider only keeping 2 tight ends?
Yeah, so I think one, I'll say I agree with you on your prediction. I have the same prediction. And to just be clear to everybody that's listening or going to listen, you haven't seen my depth chart prediction.
Nope.
I haven't
We
seen
have not
yours.
seen each
So
other's. Nope.
so it's not just like we're agreeing with everything. I have like an Excel sheet on the
Me
right
too.
side of my screen right now. I'm going through. I don't obviously wish injury on any player. This could kind of be a quiet blessing for the Bills. We were just talking about how the Bills could wait to sign a punter, and it gives them more roster flexibility. You essentially keep Morris on the roster and then say, yeah, that injury is a little worse than we thought it was. You're going on IR for 4 weeks. And then it gets kind of interesting. So let's say theoretically the Bills do that. So now they have a free roster spot. Do you give that free roster spot to Tommy Sweeney, or do you
Mhm.
sneak Isaiah Hodgins onto the roster?
Yep.
That's where the trick's going to come in. And I don't know what they would do if they really are smitten with Isaiah Hodgins after the way he's played. Maybe that's how they go, and they just try to protect him for at least a little bit and see if they can't hold on to him and keep him out of that kind of waiver wire.
Yeah, and I mean, I know Eric has been very supportive of Quentin Morris, but he also just did a film room breakdown of all the tight ends and, you know, had changed his tune a bit on Tommy Sweeney, right? I mean, I think he was a little down on Sweeney previously, watched the film, and like he was holding his own on film. So there is something to be said about that. And obviously the coaches see that. So if they do value him enough to put him on the roster, that may be the case. Now, I will say they did only keep 2 true tight ends last year on the roster. It was Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney, and that was it. And plus Reggie Gilliam. So obviously OJ Howard in the mix now. And you have to remember, they also cut Jacob Hollister last year before the season started. So a lot of people figured Hollister was going to come in, be that TE2, and some who were still not necessarily sold on Knox thought maybe he would be the TE1, and there would be like a 1A, 1B situation. So this position has kind of been a little bit of a wild card for the Bills, but it does seem like the depth they have at this position now is quite good, a far cry from where it was a few years ago. So it is nice to see finally that Bills kind of being out of tight end purgatory.
Yep.
So it looks like we're in agreement again. Offensive line up next. Okay, so let's just break it down by position here. So let's start with the tackles. I've got 4 tackles making the team. I have Dawkins, Quessenberry, Spencer Brown, and Tommy Doyle. For guards, I have Saffold, Bates, and Greg Van Roten making the team. And then at centers, I have Mitch Morse and Greg Manx. So in total, I do have 9 offensive linemen making the team. Part of me actually wanted to put Bobby Hart on the team as a 10th offensive lineman because I actually think he's been okay, like serviceable during camp and during the preseason. But I also feel like, I don't know. I can't, like, if he makes the team, so be it. But I'm just not going to put him in my 53 for right now.
Yeah. I have the same offensive line, same exact offensive line. I do think there is the chance Bobby Hart makes it over Greg Manx, or however you pronounce his name. And the only reason I say that is because the Bills' backup center is Ryan Bates. Like, that's their backup center. I do honestly believe that Mitch Morris went down, you move Ryan Bates into center, and then you probably push a Quessenberry into guard, who's played that position, or you put Van Roten into that. So
Yep.
Mance kind of loses a little bit of value because his main thing would be the backup center. I don't think he's the backup center. But as for keeping 9 offensive linemen, there's like a weird active game day rule. At least this is what I believe it is. The rules change so quick, I kind of lose it. If you can either keep 8 offensive linemen on your active game day roster, and then you get 48 active players, or you can keep 7 and you only get 47 active players. So you essentially get a free offensive lineman. And so that's
Yep.
why, to me, it's like you should keep 9 offensive linemen, always keep 1 inactive as just a protection against that. And then you have to have 8 in the active roster.
Yep. No, I agree. So let's quickly chat about practice squad here, because there is quite a bit of opportunity, I think, here for practice squad guys. We already mentioned Tanner Owen. He was cut earlier, but I think he could come back to the practice squad. I do think Luke Tenuta goes to the practice squad as well. I know that there have been some people talking about maybe Luke Tenuta making the team as maybe a 10th offensive lineman, or maybe if they don't keep Greg Van Roten. I think that would be I don't think that would be the best move, because I think the Bills are short on guard. So that's why in my mind, I don't think he makes it, but I do think he makes it to the practice squad. And I even think a guy like Jacob Capra, who they cut earlier today, could make it back to the practice squad as well. So, where do you come out on Tenuta? Because I think there's been, like Joe B and a few others, I think had some early predictions of him potentially making the 53.
Yeah. So as for, like, I'll start with the concept of keeping him as a 10th offensive lineman. I don't really see the Bills keeping 10 offensive linemen. We talked about kind of the questions that they're going to have just in the skill positions there. Like, do you keep Hodgins or not? Do you keep Tommy Sweeney or not? If you keep 10 offensive linemen, it even makes that conversation more difficult. And I also think another part to this whole 9-man conversation that we talked about before I get to practice squad is like Bakker. Like, he's on IR right now, but he's going to come back at some point. So a certain player is a placeholder for him. To me, that placeholder is either Van Roten, whatever it is, or Greg Mance. So if you put Tenuta on it, is Tenuta then just the placeholder for Bakker? I think Tenuta is going to practice squad. I wouldn't be surprised to see Bobby Hart, Jacob Capra, and Tanner Owen there as well. As far as Tenuta goes, I haven't really keyed on him at all in the games that I've watched. I remember reading some of his scouting reports, and there was some concern. I think he has short arms. I think that was one of the knocks on him. And for a tackle, that's kind of a weird thing to have, is short arms. But maybe they go down the path in the future, if they can stash him on practice squad, that they try the Tommy Doyle experiment they tried this year, where they kicked Tommy Doyle into guard in the training camp in preseason. Maybe Tenuta could ultimately move there. But yeah, I think Tenuta's practice squad guy pretty much. We'll see if he gets claimed, but I think that's where he's going to end up.
Yeah, I don't see him getting claimed. I also think Bobby Hart played a little bit inside as well. So, I mean, is it possible that he could? This is where it's been interesting, because like this is one of those situations where you look at it and you're like, man, Cody Ford probably could have made this team and had a decent chance to be like the swing backup guard, like for both guard positions. But the Bills decided like, hey, we'll get something for him, and we'll go with what we got. That's why I think Greg Van Roten, is pretty much a lock to make the team. I could look stupid tomorrow and he could get cut, but I just think from a numbers game standpoint, like if you cut Greg Van Roten and then you really only have two true guards like on the team with Saffold and Bates. I mean, Quessenberry obviously could play guard, and like you mentioned, Tommy Doyle, but like they're not true guards. Like Quessenberry's played tackle like his entire career, except for maybe a few snaps. And Tommy Doyle is a natural tackle. So it's going to be really interesting. And yes, this is actually a good point by Spin. Van Roten can play center. He was playing center, I believe, in the Broncos game, preseason game, if I'm not mistaken. Someone can fact check me on that. So that could give them flexibility into maybe putting Manx on IR if his injury If his injury proves to be too serious, maybe that frees up a roster spot for Bobby Hart to make the team. So we will see. There's a lot of potential configurations for this offensive line, but I think I kind of just see them keeping 9 offensive linemen is kind of how I feel it's trending.
And the one more possibility is they make another trade, like Brandon Beane's notorious for doing this, is trading one of these guys that could probably compete for a starting role on another team. Because the Bills' second team OL, they didn't look great in preseason, but they are NFL caliber players. Maybe he moves on from a Van Roten for a 5th round pick or something, and he can move Bobby Hart into that spot. I don't know. I'm with you though. I don't like the idea of moving on from Van Roten because then you don't have a true guard to back up in case somebody does get hurt.
Yeah. I mean, Charles says trading Ford tells us Bean feels okay about the guard depth, or it tells us that he was trying to get some value out of him, knowing Ford was on an expiring contract and they weren't going to retain him beyond 2023 anyway. And for a backup player, maybe he felt like that was a shot worth taking. But there is some validity to Charles's point here. He felt okay with the guard depth, especially with guys like Hart getting some time at guard. And that's the Aaron Kromer effect, right? These guys learning all these different positions across the offensive line. So very interesting there. So it looks like what we've got so far, as we kind of right before we switch over to talk defense, we've got both of us looks like, what is that? 20, what is that?
25,
24, 25, 24,
25, yeah.
25 guys on offense. Why am I seeing 24? I mean, my thing's messed up. Anyway, moving over to the defense. I trust you because we have the same name, so I'll trust your addition there. Moving over to the defense. Defensive end, I mean, there's been some chatter recently, like whether Shaq Lawson's done enough to make the team. I'm still penciling him in on the 53 in my prediction at the defensive end spot. So I do have 5 defensive ends. The Bills did keep 6 last year with F.A. Obata being the 6th, but I just don't think that's going to be the case this year. I see them keeping 5. Obviously, Von Miller, Greg Rousseau. I got AJ Epinesa, Basham, and Lawson as my 5.
Yeah, kind of anticlimactic so far in this roster breakdown because I have the same exact 5. I do think, yeah, you brought up the 6 last year. I don't really see why the Bills would have 6 this year. Like, the idea was they had this really massive rotation last year where they were just sending guys in and out all the time. And I think they're still going to do that rotation essentially, but I don't think it's going to be as dominant this year. I think Von Miller is going to want to be on the field. Like, Von's not going to be set playing 50% of the snaps. I think that would frustrate him. And Greg Rousseau is kind of hopefully comes into his own this season and is a dominant force at the other end. They're still going to do the rotation. As for Shaq Lawson, I actually like against the Panthers, Shaq Lawson really stood out to me because he was essentially playing against threes. And he just looks so dominant against them that you can see the talent discrepancy there. Shaq Lawson's going to be a backup on this team, but when Shaq Lawson plays against backups, he's so much better than they are at football. It just was so obvious that game. So I think he's done enough to make this team. He has value as a run stuffer. Maybe AJ Epinesa and Shaq Lawson, or maybe it's Shaq and Basham are the ones that you switch in and out as a game day active and active at some point.
Yeah, Spin says D-line set with 9 players. I agree. Help us out. Hit that like button if you like that we're in lockstep so far. If you don't like that we're in lockstep so far, that's fine. Still hit the like button for us. Helps us out. What I should have done when we switched to defense is let you go first with yours.
True.
So it doesn't look like. So we'll do that the rest of the way. We'll let Hansel go first on his predictions so that it
doesn't look like I'm just copying what.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, defensive end, we covered that, but for the rest of the way. So defensive tackle, who do you have? What's your prediction?
Yeah. And just foreshadowing, I do feel like it's coming up soon that we're going to have a difference of opinion on something. But it won't be defensive tackle. I do not believe. I have 4 defensive tackles, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Jordan Phillips, and Tim Settle. I think that's pretty straightforward unless you have a 5th.
No, that's who I have as well. I think the interesting thing comes into play here is like, who the Bills can get to the practice squad, because this is a pretty good group. I've really liked like Brandon Bryant. To me, is a guy that I always notice when I'm watching the preseason games, especially in that Broncos game. He made some nice hustle plays. Like I like Brandon Bryant as a player. I think on another roster, he'd have a legit chance to be that fourth defensive tackle, or on a team who keeps five, he could be a fifth defensive tackle, but I just don't see it happening with the Bills. I do think he makes his way to the practice squad. Really quickly, just going back to the defensive end really quick, I'd like to see Kingsley Jonathan make the practice squad
Yeah.
as well from the end spot. He's acquitted himself nicely during the preseason. And then guys like Eli Anku, CJ Brewer, those will be interesting names to see if either of those guys find their way to the practice squad. We know Ely did get playing time last year in real games, so the Bills are comfortable with him. I could see him making his way to the practice squad, but those would be the two guys. I like those guys. To me, are kind of stalwarts as the backup defensive tackles, is Brandon Bryant and Eli Anku, and also Mike Love going back to defensive end. Like he's been a sort of a cult favorite for the Air Raid Hour for a number of years. So he's another guy where it wouldn't surprise me if he got claimed by another team. But again, that's one thing I would just want to say is like, we're talking about 6-7 guys that we think like are good enough to be claimed by another team, but in reality, maybe only like one of them is going to get claimed.
Yeah.
So
I do think you make a good point with Brian and Anku though. Like they're both NFL like this team is so good that NFL caliber players might make the practice squad. Like that's what we're discussing now. And that's why I do think you could see a surprising number of claims this year. And by surprising number of claims, I'd max that out at 3. Like, I don't think it's going to be more than 3. That's the biggest number you'll see. And I don't even think you'll see that. But yeah, maybe a team's like, we need a defensive tackle. Go get Brian or go get Anku. Like they know that these guys can play in the NFL. They know that they're not just going to be like a duck out of water. I think that's the saying. So they could target them. One thing I'm kind of interested in, let's say hypothetically, Bryant or Anku gets claimed and the Bills are like, we want to have 2 defensive tackles in that practice squad room. One name I haven't heard anybody bring up in a long, long time, and I would love to bring back on practice squad if somehow he's healthy enough, is Justin Zimmer. Like, I don't know what happened to Justin. I know he got hurt last year, but Justin Zimmer has been like very radio silent. If the Bills could bring him back and he is healthy, stash him on practice squad. He's always someone you could throw in if you really need him in a pinch.
Yeah, I believe, what was it? He had a major, like, was it ACL? I can't remember something like that. So he's a UFA right now. Yeah, I mean, so he is just sitting out there. It'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see. And this is a good comment that Mary C makes, and I think we're gonna see that play out here when we get to that position. Trey going on IR. I think actually, I think the Bills have 2 options, right? They can obviously put him on the active roster, which doesn't seem likely. They can put him on the reserve, physically unable to perform list, which means he can't even practice for 4 weeks. But they could do that now, or they could put him on IR after they activate him to the roster and then put someone else in that spot. To me right now, like before we get, I just think it's trending towards him going on physically unable to perform, but we'll see. The way that Brandon Beane described it, like he's not just going to go out there, go full go at practice and then them expect him to play right away. So that to me seems like they're going to be quite cautious with it. But in any case, this might be where we might differ. And this is linebacker. Now the Bills kept 6 linebackers last year. Do you have them keeping 6 again this year?
I'm like hoping we disagree. I do have them keeping 6, technically 7. Andre Smith is going to be suspended. So he kind of is a stash player at that point where the Bills can just put him on the suspension list and he doesn't count against the 53. Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds, locks. Terrell Bernard, lock. Tyler Matakevich, lock. And then Tyrell Dodson and Balin Spector round out my top 6. So are you keeping 6 or are you going to 5?
I have 6, and I have those 6, and I have highlighted Balin Spector in orange, and I have it listed my orange highlight is that he's the second to last player to make the team. When my last player to make the team is coming up here in a minute. But yes, I do have them keeping 6. Part of me, in my heart, I do want them to kind of keep 5 and put Spectre to practice squad, because you're going to potentially see how your life could be with 5 linebackers for a couple weeks. And then if you really wanted to bring a 6th guy back, you could probably bring Andre Smith back after his suspension's over. So keeping 6, you kind of put yourself in an interesting position when Andre Smith's suspension is over. And so that's where it kind of becomes a little tricky for me, because throwing Spectre to practice squad, keeping 5 until Andre Smith's suspension's over, then putting in the roster kind of like, to me, is like the smoothest, like, don't hurt Spectre's feelings. Hey, you're just a rookie. We're going to put you on practice squad. But if like, put him on the roster and Smith comes back, and then what do you do with him, right? Like, do you cut it? Like, what do you do? So that's where it's tricky for me, although he has played well in the preseason, and he's played a lot of special teams in the preseason too. So I think Balin Spectre is going to make the team. But I will not be upset if the Bills only keep 5 and kind of play it out that way with the Andre Smith situation, because even if Spectre does make the team, what happens when Andre Smith's suspension is up? That's going to be interesting.
And I'll say, as far as Spectre goes, like, I'll be very transparent. I don't watch a lot of college football. I don't particularly like college football. So it's not like I watched him every single snap he played. But when the Bills drafted him, I was like, who is this guy? So I went and watched some of his like actual like tape from Clemson. And the thing that stood out to me is his instincts just like were so obvious watching him play. And his RAS score, he's got like an 8.5 RAS. So you couple that RAS with those instincts. And to me, I look at him as a minimum. He might be a special teams ace at some point in his career. So maybe he's the heir apparent to Tyler Matakevich when Matakevich leaves, if he ever leaves the Bills. But as far as Spectre goes, he was one of my guys at the end of the roster where it's like, do I keep him? Do I not keep him? And I think a lot of this comes down to our conversations earlier. Do the Bills keep 7 wide receivers? Let's say in theory, and I could see almost no way this happens, the Bills absolutely love Raheem Blackshear. They're like, we cannot let him go to waivers. Maybe this is the spot that they kind of give up in order to keep him on the roster. Again, I don't see any way the Bills keep 5 running backs, but just saying these conversations are probably happening because we're talking about the 52nd, 53rd positions on the Bills roster.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with your take on the Blackshear thing, right? Like it's like roster gymnastics, right? To get to keep all your guys, whether they're on practice squad or active roster, your goal is to keep them, right? So if you have to do a little bit of roster gymnastics to do that, then that's what you do to make sure these guys don't leave the building. And Connor makes a great point. Like, stashing Spectre and keeping Hodgins on the roster may be your best percentage chance to keep both of them inside the building. So I definitely don't disagree with that. My viewpoint was purely coming from history, right? They keeping 6 wide receivers and 6 linebackers, but I could see this, right? This was one of those decisions I had to wrestle with when making my prediction, was basically Balin Spectre or Isaiah Hodgins. And so I think, Connor, what you're saying here is probably what a lot of people are thinking when they make their 53-man roster predictions, is like, they're going to have to make this decision whether they want to keep Spectre or Hodgins on the roster, or even a guy like Tywan Jones if they want to. But if you keep Spectre on the roster and he's played special teams, you've got guys like Spectre, Matakevich, Kumaro, Tywan Jones. Like, your special teams units are starting to look really good once you start really breaking that down, and these guys at the bottom of the roster. And I think that means a lot to the Bills. So we will see what happens in due time there.
And to throw out one more thing in regards to the claim, and it's worth remembering that if you claim a guy off waivers, they have to go to your 53. They cannot go to your practice squad. So with that in mind, the one reason I might refute Isaiah Hodgins over Spectre, who has the better chance of getting claimed, is Spectre can go to another team and at a minimum play special teams.
True.
Like, he can go do that. So if you're willing to claim him and put him on your roster, maybe you're like, he's a developmental linebacker, but at least we can put him on the field. If you're claiming Isaiah Hodgins, he's not your number 2 wide receiver, unless you're the Bears, in which case maybe he is. But so if you're trying to basically build out how those claims might work, people might look at Hodgins and be like, look, do we want to claim a wide receiver 4? He takes up a roster spot. What if he doesn't work out? Then we cut him. It was a waste of a claim. Whereas Spectre, at a minimum, we'll throw him on special teams and we have a guy. So I constantly keep playing with that. And I think the Bills are essentially going to be looking at these situations and saying, who's going to get claimed? And then just trying to stash. As soon as you stash, too, you get the 3 protections. So you can protect them. As soon as you get them there, if they could get Hodgins there, they can get Blackshear there. Those are the guys that they might say, yep, lock them down. You can't take them anymore.
Yep. And you know, when we talk about these practice squad guys, and you're right, like it's not just like, oh, another team claiming them, like you said, like that they have to go to the other team's active roster if they do get claimed. And that's why I say, even out of these 6 or 7 guys that are potentially claimable, right? They're claimable guys. Like I feel like the only chance of maybe more than 1 or 2 is like if it's 3 different teams, right? Like claiming 3 different guys. Like, okay, like that's just bad luck. But like the statistics and the history would say that's not going to happen. No, like the Bills roster is very, very good, but like even that seems like a statistical anomaly. So unless you're the Bears, says Stephen Burns, and yes, that is true. So moving on to corner. And I'll let you kick this off with that, knowing that Trey White comment from a few minutes ago. So what do you got going on at corner?
Okay. This is where I think we're going to differ on one guy. And this is going to be the only guy on the whole roster we disagree on. So one, I've been very adamant Trey White is not starting the season. I don't really see a way he is. I think the Bills can survive without him. And I think the primary goal is to get Trey White back when he's 100% healthy. Banged Up Bills actually spoke about it, which is a great follow on Twitter. He knows his stuff and he's really good and helpful. He made a really good point to me. He essentially said, because we were comparing Chris Godwin and Trey White. He said Chris Godwin gets to decide where he's running. So if Chris Godwin's ACL isn't 100% healed, where he's not confident on that lateral movement, well, he'll just run go routes or skinny posts or something along those lines. Trey White doesn't get to dictate the movement. And if you know that knee's not 100%, let's imagine Cooper Kupp on him. If you know that knee's not 100%, you're just going to do a quick in route and just force him to cut on that knee. And if he can't, you're going to be wide open every time. So let him be 100% healthy, which I don't think he is. Trey White for me, PUP, IR, whatever it's going to be. That leads me to my 6 cornerbacks. So Teron Johnson and Cyron Neal, I put it the slot corner spot on my depth chart. Cyron Neal will play outside, inside if he has to, but put him at slot for the sake of the depth chart. Dane Jackson, I think, is pretty clear, as well as Elam and Benford. They've been very high on Benford, and Cynthia Forland even brought up the fact that teams called her and was like, what's happening with this Benford guy? So it seems like if he ever made his way to waivers, he's going to get claimed in a heartbeat. So this is the guy that I think we're going to differ on, is the my 6th corner. So I have Nick McLeod there. And it's between Nick McLeod and Cam Lewis. And I've gone back and forth on this 100 times. Again, this goes to special teams for me, is I think that Nick McLeod at least did slightly more on special teams in the preseason. So he at least has some playability, regardless of how we even look at this. Whoever it is, Nick McLeod or Cam Lewis in that role, they are literally a placeholder until Trey White comes back. The second Trey White comes back, that guy's getting cut. So I have Nick McLeod. I also really like his speed. He's super fast. And I also think Cam Lewis got burnt a couple times against the Panthers, which kind of knocked him out of my 53.
Yeah, I mean, Nick McLeod has played well in special teams. Obviously, we saw those highlights of him on kickoff coverage, being the first guy down there, in that Denver game. And, he's made some nice plays there. We do differ. This is we're in the second to last position here. I do have Cam Lewis. I do have 6, the same 5 you mentioned, but I have Cam Lewis instead of Nick McLeod. I do have Nick McLeod going to the practice squad, but I have Cam Lewis just because I just feel like, with all the other special teams guys I kept, I figured he was a more natural slot backup to Taron Johnson, as opposed to Saran Neal, who I think really is just going to be purely special teams, or should be. Yeah. So I do have Cam Lewis as the backup slot in this scenario, but I do really like Nick McLeod. For those that don't know, Nick McLeod started at NC State. That's my alma mater. Then obviously had the injury went to Notre Dame, and then kind of battled his way into the NFL. So I am familiar with him. He's had a great story. He's really battled for everything he's gotten in his career, whether that's at the college level or now in the NFL. Really good dude. You want that guy in your building. And so my heart, I root for Nick McLeod. I think he, if Trey doesn't make it, he deserves, probably every bit of chance as Cam Lewis. But for this prediction, I just had Cam Lewis making it with the slight edge. So that's the first difference we have.
And Nick McLeod, interestingly enough, he was claimed last year. The Bengals claimed him off the Bills practice squad. So I do think whoever this player is might be one of the ones that's like Cam Lewis. I'm very confident, or not very confident, but I do believe if the Bills did waive him, he'd get picked up. He's an NFL, again, I've said this term a couple times, NFL caliber player. Cam Lewis is an NFL caliber player.
Mhm.
There's a spot on someone's roster for him. If it's not the Bills, it's someone else, and he'll get picked up.
Yep. No, I agree. And that leaves us rounding out the safety position. I think this one's probably similar to defensive tackle for us. Seems fairly cut and dry, but I'll let you share yours first.
Yep, Poyer and Hyde, obviously, and then DeMar Hamlin and Jaquan Johnson. I think Jaquan's on the last year of his contract. Not that particularly matters, but I think this is probably the last year we see him in a Bills uniform. But nonetheless, I think that four is pretty set and dry.
Yeah, and Jaquan's had a nice preseason, right? And he's had a couple nice preseasons now when he's had the chance to show. He could see him making, he had the interception last year as well. I think it was against the Texans, if I'm not mistaken, or it was against a bad team. I don't remember. It was a team.
I think the Texans sounds right.
Yeah, I think it was the Texans. But he's a guy that could go the Dean Marlowe route, right? Like very little defensive playing time, while here, Team C, in his limited time, he's played well. Team C is preseason tape, and maybe give him a chance once his contract is up with the Bills after this season. And then maybe a guy, who knows, like Nick McLeod kind of becomes that guy that fills in the future, that one of those safety spots. So I'm with you. Those are the four safeties I have. And then, for special teams, it's pretty obvious. It's going to be whatever punter we do end up signing. It's going to be Tyler Bass at kicker, and it's going to be Reed Ferguson at long snapper. So by my calculation, that puts us at a nice even 25 apiece on offense and defense, and 3 special teamers.
And one difference in the conversation.
I mean, this is wild though, and this is what I like. Why I love this part of the trajectory of what the Bills are on right now as a team is like we're not arguing, but we're debating over like the last 2 or 3 guys on a stacked roster. It's just incredible, like how far this team has come in the last couple of years. I mean, these conversations 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, we're debating 20, 25 guys who can make the team.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like, it was just a freaking gumball machine of players, and like, you didn't know which one was coming out. So these last 2 seasons, honestly, have been so, I mean, last year the debate was like the defensive line, and like, do we keep F.A. Obata and like a few others? And like, there was some debate over Cam Lewis as well last year. So like, it's fun to be in this position, and it's fun to kind of know that like these debates over the last 3 or 4 guys on the roster are like, for the most part, inconsequential to the success of the team. But like, it's pretty cool to see like a lot of people in tune with what's happening with the Bills right now. So that does it. Go ahead. Yep. Go ahead.
Sorry. Just one quick point. Like, I know like Chris Sims, for instance, posted today his top 5 rosters, and the Bills weren't in that list, which is just absolutely incredible to me. We just went through 53 players, and the Bills through top to bottom on this roster, like there's no real holes. I guess the one hole you could say is the right side of the offensive line might be a little suspect. Like, is Rick Bates going to be as good as we all want him to be? Is it going to be Quessenberry or Brown at that right tackle spot? And will they both of them be able to hold it down? But other than that, like, where's the hole? The defense is ridiculous. Like, there is no hole on the defense, and the same with the offense. And on top of that, you have the 13th best player in the NFL apparently at quarterback. So you should be set to go and run towards a Super Bowl. It's just like you said, we went from debating, years ago, we didn't know who half the roster was going to be, and some of the names that made the roster we didn't even know who they were essentially. And now it's very like it seems very obvious. I think we're going to be wrong somewhere just because we have to be.
Oh yeah, we'll be wrong.
But nonetheless, like even if we're wrong, I think both of us would be happy with whoever we're wrong about because we know it's going to be somebody that's talented at what they do.
Yeah, I mean, the only, you know, I don't really want to see Luke Tenuta make the team, but I could see him making the team. Like that wouldn't be a preference of mine. I mean, there's really not much for me to quibble about, honestly. Like whoever makes it, like I said, it's gonna be fairly inconsequential ultimately anyway.
For sure.
So I do want to mention before we kind of wrap up here about cover one pass, and that is going to be one of the best things that you all can kind of tune into as the season gets ramping up. So cover one pass is the premium subscription to cover one content, insider information, special content, analytics, videos, analytics of the analytics for you guys out there who really want to understand the game better, who feel like the national coverage of football doesn't give you everything you want, whether and with a Bills lens on it. Cover one pass is what you need to be dialing up, because one, it's only $57 for the entire season. You get swag with it right off the bat. You get a shirt. So already you're getting something back, and you get all the access to the film room guys. You get special content. You get access to the Slack channel, game day threads, like all this extra content. So go to cover1.net, sign up for One Pass. It's only $57 for the entire season, and it'll definitely be worth it. So Hanzo, one, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Really, really liked your takes, obviously, because most of them lined up with what I was saying. But the comment section too, very in tune tonight. Like comment section was good, smart as always, bringing some really good. Jason says analytics make my head hurt. Bringing some really good comments. So, any parting thoughts for tonight before cut downs tomorrow?
No, I mean, like I said, this roster is absolutely stacked. Like whatever they do tomorrow, I have faith that it's going to probably be the right decision, or maybe even a better decision than I would make. I am very interested to see who's going to be able to make it through to the practice squad, and it's again, it's crazy how far this team has come that we're so intrigued by the practice squad because we're hoping we can stash talented players there. But this roster's built to do one thing and one thing only, and that's win a Super Bowl.
Oh yeah, I mean Steve comes in and says Chris Sims listening taking out the QB. I understand that, but this defense, it was the number one defense in the league last year, and the skill position players. Okay, maybe running back isn't necessarily top end elite, but like the skill position players, the receiving side, I mean, so you have Stephon Diggs, who's, a top 5 wide receiver in the league. Gabriel Davis, who's an ascending, wide receiver 2. You have guys like Jamison Crowder, Khalil Shakir, promising rookie. You have Dawson Knox, who broke out last year. I still think they're one of the top 5 best rosters, even without Josh Allen. And Josh Allen, I think, makes them the best roster in the NFL. Yes. And that's what I'll say about it. So, how about this? Big Baller Bean going to make a trade by tomorrow from Mary. That would be interesting. There were some rumors about a Zach Moss trade earlier today that got squashed. So we'll see. One of the more exciting sort of days, I guess, for us. Not too exciting maybe for the guys who are getting cut, but good for us to kind of finally put all this to rest. An entire off season sort of coming to a culmination with the final 53-man roster. And like you said, we're only 10 days away from the Bills being on TV opening week, and we'll have that preview show for you on Monday, kind of gearing you up, getting you set for Rams Bills, and then Thursday, of course, Air Raid Hour live pregame before the game. We will be with you Thursday before the game, probably start around 7 p.m. Eastern, leading you up to game time. So, Hansel, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Killed it as you always do. You guys can find Hansel on Twitter at Uber Hansen. And if you want to follow someone who is very active on Twitter, he is your guy to follow. So thank you all in the comments section. Until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
And now we go.
Are we having fun yet?